Welcome back to the deep dive. So, last time we really got into the brain, didn't we? All that amazing complexity.
We did. Incredible stuff. And today we're kind of following the wiring down, moving south from the brainstem along that main pathway,
Exactly. Down into the spinal cord.
which is much more than just a cable. It's this
Yeah,
crucial highway, two-way traffic, and it's got its own processing power too, especially for reflexes. Super important.
absolutely. And for this deep dive, we're drawing on Mr. Hostler's lecture notes. They're adapted from Chapter 11 of Barbara Herlihy's The Human Body in Health and Illness.
Right. Those notes are specifically for first-year nursing students,
hmm
really aimed at making these, let's face it, pretty tricky concepts easier to grasp.
So our plan is to unpack those notes. We want to get a solid handle on the spinal cord structure, how it sends messages back and forth and how it handles those super fast reflexes.
Sounds like a plan. Let's dive in.
Okay, first things first. Where exactly does this thing start?
Well, it begins right there at the bottom of the brainstem, and it actually exits the skull through a big opening.
The foramen magnum.
That's the one. Literally means large hole. Hard to forget.
Yeah. Okay, so it pops out of the skull there and then travels down through the backbone.
Exactly. Runs down inside that bony tunnel made by your vertebrae, the vertebral canal, gives it good protection.
Makes sense.
But here's something really key, especially for clinical stuff. In adults, the spinal cord itself, it doesn't actually go all the way down. It stops higher up.
Oh, right. Whereabouts?
Usually around, say, the first or second lumbar vertebra, L1 or L2 level.
I remember this. It sort of tapers off there.
It does, yeah. That cone-shaped end, it's called the conus medullaris.
Conus medullaris. Got it.
And then below that point, you don't have the solid cord anymore. Instead, it's like this bundle of individual nerve roots just continuing down through the lower spine.
And that's the one with the cool name? Cauda equina. Horse's tail.
Precisely. Cauda equina. The image really sticks, doesn't it?
It totally does.
And knowing where the cord ends and where those nerve roots start is just critical in practice. Think about lumbar punctures, spinal taps.
Right, for collecting cerebrospinal fluid.
Exactly. They do those lower down, usually between L3 and L4, or L4 and L5. Why? Because you're safely below the end of the actual spinal cord.
So you're just dealing with those nerve roots floating in the fluid. Less risk.
Much less risk. You're not going to accidentally poke the solid spinal cord itself. It's a very smart anatomical setup.
Yeah, that is clever. Kind of a built-in safety zone for doctors.
It really is. Okay, so now imagine we take a slice, a cross-section through the cord. What would you see?
You'd see, like, different colored areas, right? Gray matter and white matter.
Yep. And they're arranged in a specific way. There's this butterfly or maybe an H shape right in the middle. That's the gray matter.
Okay, gray in the middle,
Uh-huh.
and the white matter is around it.
Exactly. The white matter forms the outer part, the columns. And the big difference is what they're made of and what they do.
So the gray matter.
That's packed with the actual neuron cell bodies. And interneurons, those are the connectors between neurons. Plus, tons and tons of synapses where all the communication happens. It's like the local processing hub.
Okay, processing hub. And the white matter. That's the fast lane, isn't it? Because of myelin.
You got it. White matter is mostly bundles of myelinated axons. That myelin sheath acts like insulation, lets the electrical signals travel really fast. These bundles form the tracts, the pathways going up and down.
So processing center inside, fast highways outside. That's different from the brain, isn't it? In the brain, the gray matter cortex is on the outside.
Good point. Yeah, it's flipped. And the notes suggest this arrangement really suits the spinal cord's job. Having the gray matter central makes it great for quick, local processing like reflexes.
Right there on the spot.
Exactly.
Ah.
And the white matter on the outside is perfect for being that long-distance highway, shooting sensory info up to the brain and motor commands down to the body. It's all about function.
Makes sense. Okay, let's talk about that highway traffic. Starting with the signals going up. Sensory information. The ascending tracks.
Okay. The notes highlight two main ones we need to know. First up, the spinothalamic tract.
Spinothalamic.
Yeah.
Where does that one live in the cord, and what's it carrying?
It runs in the front and side parts of the white matter columns, anterior and lateral, and it's crucial for carrying signals about pain, temperature, and also what we call light touch, like a very gentle brush against the skin.
Okay, pain, temp, light touch,
Yeah,
vital stuff. What's the other major ascending route?
that would be the dorsal column medial lemniscus pathway. Bit of a mouthful.
Yeah. Where's that one?
This one's in the back, the posterior white columns, and it carries different info. Fine touch, like being able to tell exactly where you touched or feeling textures.
Like reading Braille, maybe?
Exactly like that. Also vibration sense and proprioception.
Proprioception, refresh my memory. That's knowing where your body is.
Yep. Your sense of where your limbs are, how they're moving, even with your eyes closed. Super important for balance, coordination, all that.
Okay, so hang on. This is interesting. The notes are saying that different types of touch or different sensations travel in totally separate parts of the spinal cord, like dedicated lanes.
That's exactly it. It might seem surprising, but yeah. Pain and temperature take one route, the spinothalamic. Fine touch and body position take another, the dorsal column pathway. It shows how specific these pathways are.
Wow, okay. And where do they end up in the brain?
Both of these major sensory pathways eventually route through the thalamus. Think of the thalamus as the brain's main relay station for sensory input. From there, the signals go to the correct part of your sensory cortex, up in the parietal lobe. That's where you become consciously aware of the sensation.
Fascinating how specialized it all is. Okay, that covers signals going up. What about commands coming down, telling muscles to move?
Right, the descending tracts. And the big one, the main player for voluntary movement, is the corticospinal tract.
Corticospinal suggests where it starts and ends.
Exactly. Starts up in the cortex, specifically the primary motor cortex in your frontal lobe. That's where you initiate a voluntary move. Then the axons travel down, mostly through the lateral white columns of the spinal cord.
So if I decide right now to wiggle my fingers, that command starts in my motor cortex and travels down this corticospinal tract.
Precisely. That's your main line for conscious control over your skeletal muscles.
Okay. Now, there's this concept that always twists my brain a little. Decussation, the crossing over.
Yes, decussation. It just means that nerve tracts cross from one side of the central nervous system, brain or spinal cord, to the other side.
Which explains why the left side of my brain controls the right side of my body,
Right.
and vice versa.
That's the main consequence, yeah. And most sensory info from the right side goes to the left brain, too. It's a fundamental principle.
But why? Why crossover? Seems kind of counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it? The notes mention the likely evolutionary reason is improved coordination, especially coordinating vision, balance, and fine motor control. It's actually pretty common across vertebrates.
Interesting. And do all the tracks cross at the same place?
No, and that's important. They cross at different levels. The notes point out key spots.
Oh, okay.
Well, the spinothalamic tract pain and temp, that one, tends to cross pretty low down near where the sensory nerve enters the spinal cord.
Okay.
But the dorsal column pathway fine touch, proprioception that waits until it gets way up into the brainstem, specifically the medulla oblongata, before it crosses.
And the motor one, the corticospinal tract.
That one crosses in the medulla oblongata too, but in very specific structures called the medullary pyramids.
Ah, the pyramid. So this crossing over, it has real clinical implications, right? Like with a stroke.
Absolutely. It's a classic example. If someone has a stroke that damages the motor cortex on the left side of their brain, or maybe the corticospinal tract fibers before they cross in the pyramids,
then the weakness or paralysis shows up on the right side of their body.
exactly. That contralateral effect is a direct result of decussation. Really brings the concept home.
It really does.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the medulla oblongata there a couple of times.
Yeah, the lowest part of the brainstem, connecting down to the spinal cord.
What else do the notes say about its job? Seems important.
Oh, it's incredibly important. The notes stress it's vital for survival. It contains centers that automatically control your breathing, your heart rate, your blood pressure, basic life support functions.
Wow. So really fundamental stuff.
Totally. And, like we said, it's also that major crossing point for the corticospinal motor tracts in those medullary pyramids, a critical junction box.
Managing life support and directing traffic for movement. Busy place.
Very busy. Now, linked to those motor tracts, the notes talk about grouping them into two systems, pyramidal and extrapyramidal.
Okay, let's break that down. Pyramidal first. What falls into that category?
So the pyramidal system mainly includes that big one we discussed, the corticospinal tract, plus another related one, the corticobulbar, which controls muscles in your head and neck. They start in the motor cortex.
And the pyramidal name comes from?
Because they pass through those medullary pyramids in the medulla. That's the defining feature.
Got it. And their function is that direct voluntary movement.
Yes. Think. Conscious, intentional, often skilled or fast movements. Reaching for something, speaking, typing, walking. Deliberate actions.
Okay, direct and deliberate. What about the extrapyramidal system?
That's basically all the other descending motor tracts, names like rubrospinal, reticulospinal, vestibulospinal. The key thing is they do not pass through the medullary pyramids.
So they take a different route. And do they have a different job?
Yeah, their role is more about the automatic subconscious aspects of movement. Things like maintaining your posture, adjusting muscle tone, keeping your balance, smoothing out movements that the pyramidal system initiates. They provide the background stability and coordination.
Okay, so one is the driver, the other is like the suspension and power steering.
That's not a bad analogy, actually. And the extrapyramidal system works very closely with a group of structures deep inside the cerebrum called the basal nuclei, or basal ganglia.
Ah, basal nuclei. I feel like I've heard those mentioned with movement disorders,
Yeah.
like Parkinson's.
Exactly. The notes use Parkinson's as a prime example. In Parkinson's, there's damage to parts of the basal nuclei. This messes up the extrapyramidal system's ability to regulate movement smoothly.
So the person might still want to move. The pyramidal system is trying.
Right, the intent is there, but because the extrapyramidal system and basal nuclei aren't coordinating properly, you get the rigidity, the tremors, the difficulty starting and stopping movements that are characteristic of Parkinson's.
Wow. It really shows how interconnected it all is. You need both systems working together.
Absolutely. They're described separately, but in reality, they're constantly interacting for fluid, normal movement.
Okay, that's a great clarification. Now, let's move just outside the spinal cord itself. What about the nerves that actually branch off and connect to the body?
Right, those are the spinal nerves. And there are 31 pairs of them. They exit the spine through little openings between the vertebrae, the intervertebral foramina.
31 pairs. And the notes mention they're mixed. What does that mean?
Mixed means that each single spinal nerve contains both sensory fibers coming in and motor fibers going out.
Ah, okay. So sensory fibers are afferent, carrying information to the spinal cord from your skin, muscles, etc.,
Correct. Reporting touch, pain, temperature, stretch, all that. And the motor fibers are efferent carrying commands from the spinal cord out to your muscles and glands.
telling them what to do. So if I think about the nerve going to my arm, it has wires for feeling things in my arm and wires for moving my arm muscles, all bundled together.
Exactly that. It's a two-way communication highway within that single nerve bundle.
Yeah.
Very efficient design.
It really is.
And the notes mention, future deep dives will likely get into how these nerves branch further into networks called plexuses and how skin areas map to specific nerves' dermatomes. But the key takeaway for now is that mixed nature.
Definitely more to explore there. Okay, finally, let's circle back to something the spinal cord does directly and incredibly well. Reflexes.
Yes, a major role. Reflexes are these automatic, super fast, involuntary responses, often protective, designed to react to something potentially harmful before you even consciously think about it.
And the speed comes because the processing happens right in the spinal cord, bypassing the brain initially.
That's the key. The decision, the command to react, happens locally in the spinal cord gray matter. It doesn't wait for the signal to go all the way up to the brain and back down.
And that pathway is the reflex arc.
The reflex arc, exactly. The notes break it down nicely into 5 core parts. You need all 5 for it to work.
Okay, walk us through them. Part 1.
Part 1 is the sensory receptor. This is what detects the stimulus in the first place. Could be pain receptors in your skin, stretch receptors in a muscle, whatever.
Okay, detects the trigger. Then
An afferent neuron, sensory neuron, carries that signal into the spinal cord. That's part 2.
signal goes in. What's part 3?
Part 3 is the integration center. This is usually inside the gray matter. It might be a direct connection to a motor neuron, or more often, it involves one or more interneurons that process the incoming signal and decide on the output.
Okay, the decider in the cord. Part 4.
Part 4 is the efferent neuron, a motor neuron. It carries the command out from the spinal cord towards the target.
And finally, part 5 must be the target itself.
Yep. Part 5 is the effector, usually a muscle that needs to contract or maybe a gland that needs to secrete something. That's what actually performs the reflex action.
Receptor, afferent neuron, integration center, efferent neuron, effector.
Yeah.
Got it. And the classic example is touching a hot stove.
Perfect example. Your hand jerks back instantly. Receptor detects heat pain, signal goes in via efferent neuron, integration center in the cord says pull back, command goes out via efferent neuron, effector muscle contracts, hand moves.
And it happens so fast. You pull your hand away before you even consciously register. Ouch, that's hot.
Exactly. That split-second timing, bypassing the brain for the initial reaction, is what makes these spinal reflexes so incredibly protective. It's also why doctors test reflexes, like the knee jerk.
Tapping the knee.
Yeah, it checks if that whole reflex, or the sensory input, the spinal cord connection, the motor output, is working properly at that specific spinal level. It's a quick diagnostic tool.
That really highlights the spinal cord's independent processing power. Okay, let's quickly recap the main points from Mr. Hostler's notes, just to solidify things.
Good idea.
We started with the spinal cord's location, starting at the foramen magnum, ending around L1, L2, with the cauda equina dangling below, and why that L1, L2 endpoint matters for lumbar punctures.
Right. Then we looked inside, at the central gray matter for processing reflexes and local stuff, surrounded by the white matter tracts, those ascending and descending information highways.
We talked about specific highways, ascending sensory ones like the spinothalamic carrying pain and temperature, and the dorsal column pathway for fine touch and proprioception.
And the main descending motor highway, the corticospinal tract, carrying those voluntary movement commands down from the brain.
We covered decussation, that crossing over, and how it explains why the left brain controls the right body, and how a stroke demonstrates this clinically.
Yep. And we touched on the medulla's vital functions and role as a crossing point. Then we distinguished the pyramidal motor system for direct voluntary movement passing through the pyramids, from the extrapyramidal system for automatic control, posture, and tone, working with the basal nuclei.
Using Parkinson's as an example of what happens when that extrapyramidal coordination breaks down.
Exactly. Then we looked at the 31 pairs of spinal nerves exiting the cord, emphasizing their mixed nature, carrying both sensory in and motor out.
And finally, we broke down the reflex arc into its 5 components: receptor, afferent neuron, integration center, efferent neuron, effector, using the withdrawal reflex to show the spinal cord's rapid protective action.
I think that covers the key territory from the notes.
Nicely summarized. Now, the notes include a challenge question, sort of a clinical scenario to test our understanding. Let's work through it.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine you're assessing a post-op patient. They tell you they have a burning sensation and some numbness, specifically on the back of their right thigh. But importantly, when you test their muscle strength in that leg, it seems perfectly normal. So based on the tracks we discussed, which one is most likely causing these sensory symptoms?
Okay, interesting case. Let's break it down. Symptoms are burning and numbness. Those are sensory, right?
Definitely sensory. Pain-like sensation, burning, and altered touch feeling, numbness.
And the key clue is that motor strength is normal.
Right, so that immediately points away from the major motor tract, the corticospinal tract. If that were significantly damaged, you'd expect weakness.
Agreed. So we need to think about the sensory tracts. Which one carries the kind of information described: burning pain, temperature, maybe altered touch?
Well, we had the spinothalamic tract for pain, temperature, and light touch.
And the dorsal column pathway for fine touch, vibration, and proprioception.
So burning sounds a lot like pain or temperature sensation, and numbness fits with altered touch or general sensation. That strongly points towards
The spinothalamic tract, yeah, that seems like the most likely culprit based on the symptoms provided. The dorsal column pathway deals with different types of sensation.
Makes perfect sense. The notes confirm this spinothalamic tract. It's a great example of how knowing the function of each pathway helps you figure out what might be going wrong when a patient presents with specific symptoms.
Absolutely. It connects the anatomy directly to the clinical picture. That's why understanding this stuff is so fundamental.
Totally. So, thinking about this bigger picture now, we have these super fast automatic reflexes handled right there in the spinal cord, and then we have the slower, more deliberate, conscious actions controlled by the brain using pathways like the corticospinal tract. What does this kind of layered control system tell us?
That's a great question to ponder. I mean, it really highlights efficiency and maybe evolutionary pressures. Having the spinal cord handle immediate threats, pulling away from pain, adjusting balance instantly is incredibly advantageous for survival. It doesn't need to wait for the brain's deliberation.
Frees up the brain for other things.
Exactly. It allows the brain to focus on higher level processing, planning, complex voluntary movements, learning, thinking, all the stuff that requires more time and nuance. So you have this beautiful division of labor, rapid automatic protection at the lower level, and sophisticated adaptable control at the higher level.
It allows us to react instantly, but also act thoughtfully.
Precisely. It's a testament to how the nervous system evolved to handle both immediate survival needs and complex interactions with the environment. A really elegant design when you think about it.
A truly powerful and elegant system.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for helping us navigate the spinal cord today.
My pleasure. Always fascinating stuff.
And thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.